Hello, good afternoon. My name is Erin Scott and I'm part of the new Inspire Learning team leading on numeracy and mathematics. I have the absolute pleasure to be joined here today by Liz Pinder, who's going to co-present on the session for today, who is an early years specialist who will be joining us in just a little while. So our session today is around effective assessment approaches in numeracy and maths. This is session 4 within our professional learning series. So we're going just to get started now. So we're going to start our session today by sharing our 3 kind of overarching key aims of this professional learning. So our first key aim is to develop a deeper understanding around effective assessment approaches in numeracy and mathematics. So what does that look like? What is some of the research evidence telling us? Our second key aim of today is to build a stronger understanding around questioning strategies that will allow that promotion of mathematical thinking, mathematical ideas, and allow our learners to demonstrate their mathematical reasoning skills. Our third key aim of our session today is to signpost and provide an introduction and thinking about further guidance and support materials that are available around numeracy difficulties and dyscalculia. So it's a really meaty session, there's a lot of content in there, and hopefully you will find that really useful. We will revisit these aims as well at the end of our training session just to reflect on how we've covered the content. Similarly to our previous professional learning training sessions, we are going to start with some core input today, and then peppered throughout the session there's going to be some reflective questions where you can pause the video in your staff teams and discuss. And then we're going to have some follow-up activities that you can either do as part of the session, or your school facilitators might decide that these are then takeaway activities to do. But hopefully these different components are going to allow for that new understanding, or some new strategies or ideas or things to go away and think about off the back of our training session today. So we are going to start with a short starter task that's hopefully going to allow us to showcase some of the key high-level messages that we want to consider and think about in relation to assessment. So what we would like you to do is write down on a piece of paper or with a whiteboard and whiteboard pen, what do you know about 3/4? So if you could pause the video now, work independently for a few minutes, getting down any of your own thoughts and ideas, and then go on and discuss this with your colleagues in your staff teams. Thank you very much for having a go and completing the starter task. So using an open-ended question like this can be a really effective way to establish learners' knowledge, to understand their level of skill, and to see what they can do in terms of making those mathematical connections between different concepts. So some of you might have quickly gone and grabbed concrete manipulatives and started building or representing 3/4 in different ways. Some of you might have also started drawing or designing different pictorial representations for 3/4. And some people might have gone more to the abstract form or making those links with decimals, with percentages, and kind of building in their understanding and knowledge there. But what this open-ended question does is it provides that flexibility for learners to come at this from lots of different levels of ability. And I think that's why it can provide such rich assessment evidence. So I think that's just something to think about. Are we giving our learners the opportunities? Are we using these types of tasks with our learners in the classroom? So we're going to move on now. So one of the first key things that we would like to address is just the fact that the area of assessment is so vast. Assessment in itself, it's multidimensional, it's multifaceted, it's complex, and researchers have grappled for decades around optimum practices and what is the most effective practice. And what I would like to just do is just touch on a couple of the real key players that have maybe informed and shaped our thinking kind of on an international level around about assessment. So on the screen in front of you, you can see that text inside the black box. So that's actually come from Dylan Williams and Paul Black, and that was actually released 26 years ago now, would you believe? And Dylan Williams was really one of the front players in advocating the power of formative assessment, that ongoing continuous assessment within our practice. Interestingly, Daisy Christodoulou recently has released the book Making Good Progress, and she kind of unpicks whether formative assessment has actually had that desired impact in Britain as a whole. Has it actually had that impact around raising attainment? And she kind of grapples with those ideas. So that's quite an interesting text to unpick if you would like to learn a little bit more about that. In terms of thinking of kind of other key players on that kind of international stage, we have had John Hattie, who's done a lot of work around effect size and actually looking scientifically at the different aspects of learning, and many of those including elements of assessment in relation to feedback, in relation to questioning, and looking at actually the impact of those. We've got Shirley Clark, who has also been a key player in relation to formative assessment approaches. She's done an awful lot of research and work around self-assessment and peer assessment and the power of using these approaches within your practice. Many of you have come across a lot of work on Shirley Clark before. And then that brings us on to the work of Rose and Shines that already across the Scottish borders we've kind of thought about and reflected on. And Tom Sheridan's done quite a lot of work around that. And as there's been a lot of developments in cognitive science in recent decades, and that understanding of how we learn and how we best transfer things from our working memory to our long-term memory, that's also shaped our understanding of assessment. So I think one of the key things that we just want to highlight at the outset of this training is this is a really vast, extensive body of work that has been happening over decades. And there is a lot of different schools of thought on what is most effective and what does good quality practice look like in relation to assessment. So that brings us on to emphasising that we want to think about assessment as this golden thread that's fully intertwined, that's fully embedded in everything we do as practitioners. When we're in the classroom, we're constantly receiving information from our learners around so many different things that they are doing, and we're receiving information about ourselves. And it's thinking about how are we utilising that information effectively? What systems do we have in place to make the most out of that information and to really inform our next steps in our thinking? So yeah, just emphasising that we want to think of assessment not as something separate, that it is fully linked with our planning, with our teaching, and then with what our learners are being able to do. Therefore, it's crucial that we need to think carefully about the balance and interplay between the assessment approaches that we are using. And thinking about how are we using that ongoing continuous formative assessment, how are we getting that feedback and that information. And we're going to explore a lot of that within our session today. And then thinking about how are we using those summative approaches, those kind of diagnostic points in time assessment. So very often the formative approaches are described as assessment for learning, and you will see that the summative approaches are described as assessment of learning. So really thinking about how these interact with each other and about the role of both types of approach. A further key high-level message that we would like to share and think about is that of retrieval practice. So retrieval practice is where we're giving our learners the opportunity to revisit previously learned concepts. So we're going back, we're maybe looking at it either in a new context, we're maybe giving our learners opportunities to try things in a different situation. And through this, it's allowing us to assess whether those key nuggets of information had actually transferred to learners' long-term memory, and are they able to access that information. So it's really powerful, and when we're thinking about assessment, we need to keep retrieval practice at the forefront of our minds and be thinking, how are we giving our learners those opportunities? The other thing that we want to consider that you can see on the screen in front of you is that spiralling effect. So that's taking us back to Brunner's kind of analogy of that spiral curriculum, where as we're revisiting previously learned concepts, we want to think about, is there been a gradual increase in complexity and difficulty? So again, just key things to think about around assessment. So we're now going to focus in specifically on numeracy and mathematics. So many of those key high-level messages that we have just spoken about and reflected on have really informed our SBCY approach to numeracy and mathematics. We have also taken into strong consideration the work of Higgy-Elk and Higgius-4, How Good Is Our School, in relation to the key features of highly effective practice around assessment. We have focused in on 2.3, and what we have done is throughout the next few sections of our professional training, we're going to make reference to Higgius-4. We're going to talk about some of the kind of key features that it discusses, and then provide some support and examples around suggestions and how you might facilitate undertaking that within your practice. So we would like you to now have a little think about what are the key things that you are currently assessing within numeracy and mathematics. And as part of that professional discussion, we would like you to think, is there some things that you think are higher priority or are more important to assess than other things? And what is your thinking around that? So if you could pause the video now and discuss this question in your staff teams. Thank you very much for taking the time to engage with that reflective question. I'm sure within your staff teams you've come up with an extensive range of suggestions around the specific knowledge or skills that we maybe want to be assessing. You've maybe also had conversations around the importance of assessing children's mindset, children's attitude, considering their motivation levels within numeracy and maths, and also within that their metacognition, their ability to self-assess and understand themselves as a learner. But I just want to draw your attention to these kind of overarching elements and just unpick these a little before we move on. So the first one of those is conceptual understanding, and that's so important as practitioners that we're thinking carefully about how we're assessing that within our learners. So what is a learner's understanding of a concept? And a huge part of that is going to be embedding the CPA approaches. So thinking about how can they use these resources to help support them to make these models, or allowing them to develop a structure to understand different concepts. And within conceptual understanding, a huge part of that is that ability to make connections and that link between mathematical ideas. So it's so important that we're thinking about that and thinking about how are we assessing their ability to make those connections. Then thinking about that procedural fluency, that's something that as children and learners progress through primary school that we do want to unpick more of within our assessments. So that's that ability to follow those steps, to undertake a calculation, to think about the different processes involved within that. And within procedural fluency, you have accuracy, you have that flexibility, and then you also have that efficiency with different strategies. And there's definitely some strategies that are more efficient than others. So quite an important part of our assessments as learners progress through primary school is exploring their efficiency with strategies and what they're choosing to do. And all of those things feed into that mathematical reasoning. So that ability for the learner to follow those logical steps. And again, that reasoning should be embedded throughout your teaching and learning. But really within that, that's looking at the vocabulary, looking at the language. Are they able to justify and defend their solutions? And that's obviously something that's going to be really important for us to assess within the classroom. But all of these elements really feed into that learner's ability to problem solve, that ability to know what to do when you don't know what to do, and how you unpick different types of problem solving questions. You can see the circular diagram on the board in front of you, and this is actually taken from PISA, so that international assessment platform. And right at the heart of what they're looking to assess is mathematical reasoning. So I thought it was just quite interesting just to flag that up. And obviously we are also thinking about those mathematical skills, those 8 skills that we have and how important they are. So I think it's just really useful to highlight at the outset that there is a lot of things we're assessing, but we're thinking how can we blend a lot of these together and thinking about our approaches to do that.
Thank you, Erin. In order to assess these key elements, as teachers and educators, we need to have a secure subject knowledge. It's particularly important that we update this regularly as research continually informs and updates our understanding of the most effective pedagogy to support our learners to make progress. In mathematics and numeracy in particular, it is vital that we have the correct conceptual knowledge so we can support and develop the right conceptual understanding in our learners. That knowledge allows us to recognise the different ways learners may tackle a task and still arrive at a solution to a problem. It enables us to engage in discussion with learners and support them to reflect on their learning, to think critically, and describe and show their mathematical reasoning. As well as being able to identify the mathematical knowledge and thinking learners are demonstrating, even if it's being shown in a less formalised or standardised way. A firm foundational subject knowledge supports the development of high-quality assessments in which learners can demonstrate their knowledge and understanding of a range of concepts and their ability to think using mathematical reasoning. We can develop our subject knowledge through using the SBC breakthrough curriculum materials, especially the progression pathways, supporting videos, SBC training, the Education Scotland Numeracy and Mathematics Professional Learning Community on Glow, as well as professional reading.
We're now going to move on and consider planning for assessment. So as previously mentioned, in SBC, we now have an assessment diet calendar, which is hopefully going to provide guidance and support around what key assessments you might want to carry out at key points within the year. We also, as previously mentioned, have our Higgius 4 statements peppered throughout our training today. These are taken from 2.3 around effective learning, teaching and assessment. So this advocates the kind of highly effective features, and what it suggests is that planning needs to be proportionate and manageable, and clearly identifies what is to be learned and assessed. So with that in mind, as part of our planning documentation, we have created this section around planned assessments where you can think ahead within your academic year and think about what key either diagnostic or summative assessments you might have at different key points. You might also want to include in this maybe key ongoing formative assessment approaches that you're implementing or embedding within your class or within your practice. So hopefully this document will be useful just to act as that support tool to guide you and help you around your thinking about when you are planning for assessment. And I think we just want to go back and think about, we spoke about assessment being that golden thread that's fully integrated within your planning and your teaching and learning. So we just want to think about that when thinking. So the last planning support tool was for that across an academic session. We also have available further planning support tools, and this one is for across a week. So whether you're working with whole class, whether you're doing flexible working groups or working with one-to-ones, you will be receiving a lot of different information and assessment evidence. And what we thought would be really nice is just to have a place where you could kind of document your planned formative assessments throughout your week or your diagnostic assessments, and a place where you can then kind of reflect on that. Because obviously that assessment evidence is then really going to inform your next steps around your teaching and learning for the following days. And it allows us just to go back and again reflect on those highly effective features from Higgius in 2.3. The assessment approaches should be matched to learners' needs and are used to support them to demonstrate where they are in their learning. So this is available if it's helpful.
Thank you, Erin. Within early level, assessment opportunities are not planned for in quite the same way, but come naturally from the daily interactions with learners, whether this is part of the intentional promotion or not. Staged tasks to assess learners are not recommended at early level, so the initial early level progression pathway and guidance document was created to support practitioners assessing learners' competencies through their interactions, as well as to develop practitioners' subject knowledge and pedagogy in maths and numeracy. This has been revised and updated by the Curriculum and Early Years team to ensure the early and first progression pathway and guidance documents align, resulting in a seamless continuity and progression through from early to first level. Progress should be developed both horizontally and vertically through the progression pathway. To make this more apparent, the progression pathway is now in 3 colours. The white boxes show approximately the achievement of an ALK 3 learner, the light blue is approximately an ALK 4, and the darker blue approximately a P1 learner's achievement by the end of June in each year. This shading is a rough guideline for determining if a learner is on track to achieve early level by the end of P1 and should not limit or create the idea a child is behind. Benchmarks, which are not always at the end of the progression statements, are now in red to make them stand out. These benchmarks have been broken down into the small steps necessary for learners to acquire the conceptual understanding in order to be able to achieve them, and children's progress towards these can be recorded and monitored. There are some statements which are beyond the benchmarks, which enable practitioners and teachers to provide the challenge when necessary. Another addition is the mathematical vocabulary relevant to that curriculum organiser. By the end of the level, the learner should be confident to understand and to use this vocabulary, which is revised and built upon in the next level. Each organiser now has the numeracy and mathematical skills added in green to support practitioners and teachers to know which skills are to be developed through this organiser. The progression pathway is designed to align with SEAL and uses the same vocabulary and progressions such as forward number word sequences. The photographic illustrations are possible interpretations of the statements and have a heavy emphasis on concrete manipulatives to develop learners' conceptual understanding. Pictorial and abstract representations only begin to emerge as the learner progresses through P1. With this in mind, learners should be provided with concrete manipulatives to use during assessments at this stage if they wish. Because children are assessed in the moment at early level, a tool for recording and tracking learners' attainment and progress was needed, so the early level maths and numeracy tracker was created. It's exactly the same as the progression document, except without the photos. This has now been updated to reflect the changes made to the progression pathway and should be in use in all SPC settings. In ELK, practitioners should use it to record learners' individual progress and achievement, and a best fit approach, along with practitioner knowledge of the child as a learner, used to determine if a child is on track. Through its use, practitioners are able to record achievements as well as use it to identify next steps. Individual trackers are not a manageable recording tool for assessment in P1. Some ELK use a cut-up version of the trackers to record a cohort's achievement of the E&O, which is currently the intentional promotion. These cut-up group trackers provide a more manageable form for P1 teachers to use for assessment and recording of learners' progress and achievements. Erin will now talk you through the first and second level progression pathways.
Thank you very much, Liz. So similarly with our first and second level progression pathways, these have been created specifically to provide that clarity and guidance to all practitioners to really support them with their planning in terms of the content that they need to be kind of teaching within each curriculum organiser. They're also designed to provide a lot of support around assessment. So at the end of each little part, you can see the benchmark is clearly evident. And what we have then done within the 3 phases is broken down what that content looks like to support and guide you and help make those decisions around each particular benchmark. As you are teaching a particular numeracy concept, so for example, rounding and estimation, you will be determining where your learners are on the progression pathway. And what we have now created are 2 tracking systems for you to allow you to document and record that information. So we have created a Word document version or an Excel spreadsheet version. And it's up to you in your schools and settings what version you would prefer to use if this is something that you would like to try. You might already have fully embedded systems in place, but this is just another optional tracking system. So for this, we have taken each numeracy curriculum organiser and we have placed them as headings, and then underneath you can put the pupil name, and then you can place in which phase they are at in the progression, whether it's first level or second level, are they working in phase 2 or phase 3, and this will just allow you to accurately keep a very clear and consistent record of where your learners are working within each of these curriculum organisers. So we're now going to move on to explore diagnostic cohort assessments. So as an authority, we have access to a bank of assessments known as DNAs, so Diagnostic Numeracy Assessments. So Midlothian have kindly shared these with us. And there is a suite of assessments that run from early level up to second level at the moment. So there's an early level phase 1 assessment that just sits on its own. And then from early level phase 2 right up to second level phase 3, there is 3 assessments for each level, and these are identified as an A, B and C assessment. They're of similar level of difficulty, but they're just different questions, they're asked in a slightly different way. But what is really nice about these assessments is they really emphasise the CPA approach. So throughout the questions, you will notice that there's maybe Dean's materials, place value counters, you will notice a bit of bar modelling, part whole diagrams. So that's the approach that we're obviously really promoting in the Scottish Borders and emphasising to really build that strong conceptual understanding, and that is reflected within this diagnostic assessment. The assessment is divided into different key sections. So you have a number word sequences and numerals section. You then have a place value and number structure section. It then goes on to addition and subtraction, multiplication and division, and then a fractions, decimals and percentage section. So these assessments could be chunked and you could undertake a little bit at a time, or you could undertake the full assessment to give you that kind of baseline information and then at key points throughout the year. Our recommendations around when to undertake these assessments are provided in the assessment diet calendar. So all the DNA assessments, alongside a DNA assessment guidance document and a DNA assessment tracker. This is quite an in-depth detailed tracker if you would like that within your school or setting. These are all available through the Numeracy and Mathematics Padlet. I now have the pleasure to pass you over to Liz Pinder, who's going to share her wealth of knowledge and expertise around recommendations for highly effective assessment.
Thank you, Erin. Regardless of the stage of our learners, there are some key messages to ensure we provide effective assessments for our learners. In order for them to be highly effective, learners must be at the heart of them. Assessments are vital for getting it right for every child and are integral to the planning and teaching process. Educators need to plan time in which they're able to focus on observing, noticing, and assessing learners' competencies, knowledge, and skills in order to identify where the child's coming from and to identify and plan for next steps. Without the information about a learner's conceptual knowledge, understanding skills, and more importantly, any misconceptions, it's impossible to plan the teaching to take the learner forward. Many assessments in the past have tended to be computational assessments, which purely test if a child is able to remember an algorithm to get the right answer. Unfortunately, they do not test a child's ability to solve problems through the application of mathematical skills, conceptual knowledge, and procedural fluency. In order to assess these 3 elements, assessments need to be across a range of E's and O's, reflecting the interconnectedness of maths and numeracy. When we solve problems in the real world, we're required to use a variety of knowledge and skills from a range of organisers, so the assessments in schools must reflect this. Planned assessments need to identify which E's and O's are the focus, but also need to be flexible enough to identify and acknowledge learners using mathematical thinking, not necessarily within those E's and O's. The difference between low and high achievers is that high achievers have flexible thinking. Therefore, it's vital that learners are given the opportunities to develop this through the provision they're given. Assessment should require learners to make use of a range of mathematical skills and especially provide opportunities to assess their mathematical reasoning with opportunities to talk about their thinking. That if, then, because, to justify their choice of strategy used, or to convince themselves, a friend, or a skeptic of their solution. Evidence of learners' achievement should come from a range of sources, whether it's from observations, children talking, videos, questioning, learners recording and representing their maths and thinking as they're doing it in their own ways. This links the concrete, pictorial and abstract together, and the learner's reasoning can be seen. Low threshold, high ceiling assessments which have more than one solution and way of tackling the problem, as well as open questioning, provide the necessary opportunities for this multidimensional assessment and support this flexible thinking. For many years, getting answers quickly has equated with having a good understanding of maths. However, many high-achieving mathematicians work slowly because they think deeply rather than quickly. Laurent Schwartz, the renowned French mathematician, was actually known for his deep thinking rather than speed. Despite feeling stupid in school because he wasn't quick to get the answer, Schwartz's approach emphasized depth over speed. His work earned him the prestigious Fields Medal in 1950, one of the highest honours a mathematician can receive. It's a bit like an Olympic gold medal, but for maths. Studies of learning approaches have shown that an emphasis on memorization with timed tests leads to low achievers who have difficulty being able to relate concepts and fail when facts and standard algorithms are forgotten. We know that when we're stressed that the working memory struggles and shuts down. As an authority, we need to encourage depth of thinking over speed. The fluency mathematicians need comes from seeing a concept multiple times in different ways and forms, rather than the repetition of one idea in near identical questions. As learners develop their understanding of a concept, a process called compression takes place, which allows this concept to take up less room in the brain. You're only able to compress concepts, not methods, so it's vital these are well established. As educators, we continually make formative assessments resulting in micro adjustments to our planning and teaching to ensure we're meeting the needs of the learner. Observation and interactions are the main vehicle for assessment in early level, but are of equal importance throughout learners' time in education. As educators, we can learn so much about a learner's competencies, the way they think and approach a task through just watching and interacting. For example, with just a brief description of the interaction, it's amazing what we can tell about this ELK child's mathematical knowledge and understanding. The adult began by drawing 3 squares and put 1 dot in the first and 2 dots in the second and left the third square blank. The child took the chalk and drew 3 dots in the third square. She then drew another square and drew 4 dots in it. From this, we can identify the child is demonstrating a number of different mathematical competencies, which could be recorded on the child's tracker. Depending on the interaction, you may be able to identify whether the child can subitize quantities or count accurately. But they can also represent or draw to show big or bigger in relation to amount. They can make marks and draw pictures to record ideas about numbers. They can represent quantities with dot patterns. Understand the concept of one more. They can add one to a group. They can continue simple number patterns. And they can also copy a 2D shape with a degree of mathematical accuracy. However, it's not just in early level where observation provides insight into the learner's way of thinking. Observing a child using concrete manipulatives or creating a pictorial representation or using an algorithm to find a solution, especially if the learner is describing their thinking, enables the observer to assess competence, capability, and also misconceptions, allowing for that instant adjustment to be made to the lesson or changes to be made to the planned teaching approach to meet that learner's needs. What sorts of formative assessments could you make whilst interacting with the children with a jigsaw? There are 4 jigsaws in the box. The pieces are 4 different sizes and have a numeron on the back of each one to help know which ones go together. In your schools, pause the video while you discuss what you might notice as well as how you might take that learning forward. Pause the video now. Hopefully, you will have considered the following. Before you begin creating the puzzles, there is a wide range of sorting skills, whether with a given criteria or a child-chosen criteria. These pieces have numbers on the back to sort them into the 4 different puzzles in the box, so you've got numeral recognition, or sorting by shape attributes, edge piece with 1 straight side, a corner piece with 2 straight sides, or maybe sorting by size. You could have mathematical vocabulary to describe the pieces with curved or straight sides, use of mathematical vocabulary to justify why a piece has been sorted or chosen to fit into the puzzle where it is, responding to mathematical vocabulary to describe position, the use of mathematical vocabulary to describe position next to, beside, between, matching of pattern and colours, and spatial awareness of the possibility of a piece fitting. Whether it's in ELK or P7, the quality of interactions and questioning determines how much is discovered about that learner's competencies. Unless learners are given the opportunity to demonstrate their mathematical knowledge, understanding and thinking, what they know and how they think will remain in the dark and unknown. Assessments can be through interacting with a group, playing a familiar game which doesn't require the learner's concentration to follow the rules, therefore opening up the possibility to talk about the mathematics which is happening. Other interactions may provide opportunities to pose questions such as, well, if this happens, what do you think might happen? Why? From this, we can assess the learner's mathematical reasoning. Open-ended questioning is a robust way of formatively assessing learners. Questions such as, what do you notice? What do you wonder? Or what has changed and what stayed the same? Gives learners the time and space to talk about what they know and understand using mathematical reasoning and vocabulary, and for educators to assess them, providing a wealth of knowledge to support future planning and teaching. I'll hand you over to Erin now, who will talk further about other approaches to continuous formative assessment.
Thank you very much, Liz. So as Liz highlighted, observation and effective questioning is absolutely crucial in order for us to be able to check for learners' understanding and identify next steps. And we're going to explore questioning in greater depth later in our training today and unpick actually different types of questioning strategies. But for now, we want to really build on the work of session 3 around effective numeracy and maths learning, because we know that assessment needs to be fully embedded within that. It's not something separate. So a lot of this is going to seem familiar to the content shared in session 3. And the first thing we just want to discuss today is that of number talks. So number talks is a really powerful tool in order to carry out lots of formative assessment. So you can be assessing children's vocabulary, children's mathematical language through using number talks. It's a really strong way to determine their mathematical thinking through using the different hand signals, either of one strategy or more than one strategy that we shared in our professional training, our first session on culture, ethos and environment. It allows you to very quickly formatively identify what learners have a strategy, what learners maybe need more thinking time. So again, providing you with really useful assessment evidence. Through actually then unpicking the learner's strategy as part of your number talks, it's allowing you to see what their mental procedural fluency is like, what strategies do they have, and what can they share. It also allows you to determine their ability to justify, reason, or defend their solution and strategy. So again, a really valuable way to collect lots of assessment evidence. A further task that we shared as part of our rich starter tasks was that of the which one doesn't belong. And again, this can provide you with formative assessment evidence around learners' ability to work collaboratively with a partner, to share their thinking, to use that mathematical vocabulary, to share their language and their ideas. So again, really nice little formative assessment strategies that you can use within your practice. So we're now going to move on to consider that of the CPA approaches. So throughout our training, we have really emphasised the importance of using both concrete and pictorial approaches throughout your numeracy and maths lessons. But there's lots of really rich, valuable, formative assessment information that we can gather from using this. So what's really important is just to observe your learner. And through doing this, you can determine what is their conceptual understanding like, what is their number sense like, and you can also then really strongly determine, do they understand the mathematical tool? Do they know how to use that manipulative? And what do they do with it? And just maybe spending some time within that deliberate practice phase, observing your learners and just thinking, how are they moving straight more towards the abstract, or are they very heavily reliant on it? And it's going to really allow you to determine a lot about their mathematical thinking. So continuing with our formative assessment approaches, we would also really strongly advocate the power of using a whiteboard and whiteboard pen. These are so highly effective as it's a non-permanent surface. So learners are not concerned about making a mistake. You're not trying to instill that worry or fear. They can change things, they can edit their working, they can come up with multiple strategies. And it's a really nice way for learners to again demonstrate that procedural fluency. And from that, they can show you their level of accuracy with a particular strategy. They can show you either their flexibility or maybe it's efficiency that you're looking for further up the school with particular strategies. But again, it's going to give you such valuable formative assessment information. You might be using these whole class, or again, you might be using these with a flexible working group. So yeah, I would really strongly recommend the use of whiteboards and pens throughout the majority of your numeracy and mathematics lessons. The next one as well that you can see on the screen is that of the think board, and we did a version of that in our starter task today when we asked you to think about what connections or what you knew about 3/4. But a brilliant way just to determine learners' knowledge, their understanding, but also that ability to make those rich connections between mathematical concepts that we know is so important and powerful. So again, just further key ideas to strengthen that formative assessment evidence. So we're now going to move on to our next reflective question that we would like you to discuss in your staff teams today. So the first question is, what key formative assessment approaches do you currently use within numeracy and mathematics, and what do you find most effective? If you could then go on and have a discussion around what systems do you have in place currently at either a class level or a whole school approach maybe for utilising and recording this feedback that you get from your formative assessment approaches. And then the third question we'd like you to come on and have a wee think about are, what are your thoughts around self and peer assessment in numeracy and mathematics? So if you could pause the video now and discuss in your staff teams. So the next section of our professional training session today is going to focus on questioning strategies. So I'd just like to draw your attention to this document that's been produced by Education Scotland. And it is effective questioning to support assessment in numeracy and mathematics. So within this guide, Education Scotland emphasise the importance of effective questioning approaches within our practice. And they highlight that through using effective questioning strategies, we can determine learners' level of understanding. We can also identify any misconceptions. We can establish that kind of cutting edge point, and fundamentally we can clearly identify their next steps and where we need to plan and where we need to teach next. So within this document, they outline some of the different types of questioning, and they give lots of really nice examples and different ideas around how you could use these in your practice. So we're just going to touch on a few now that are on the screen, and then you're going to have time to go on and explore the questioning guide. So open-ended questions. As we've kind of said previously as part of the starter task, this is a really rich way for establishing mathematical thinking, for allowing that creativity to flourish, where learners, there's not just one right or wrong answer. And all children can access these questions and come at it from a different starting point. The next one that they emphasise is the power of same surface, different depth style questions. Now, this was initially started by Craig Barton, who wrote the book That's How I Wish I Taught Maths. Maybe many of you have read it or come across Craig Barton's work. He's also got a really good podcast if you are interested in finding out a bit more. But that was quite similar to the question within the starter task, where we said, what do you know about 3/4? So initially it had the kind of same surface, that all learners had the accessibility to that, but different learners could come at it with different levels of depth. Some learners were making those connections with decimals and with percentages and showing that kind of multi-representation in their understanding, whereas others were maybe just showing concrete approaches or pictorial approaches. So again, there can be different levels of depth. Another questioning strategy that Education Scotland talk about is here is the answer, what is the question? And that's where you would provide learners with the answer and then they actually have to work backwards and then come up with different types of questions. So a really nice way, just something a little bit different and to really again get that mathematical thinking. Another one they talk about, which is really nice, is, so you've maybe got a couple of ideas already, but what else do you know? So they're trying to really extend that learning and that thinking and deepening that understanding and that knowledge. So something else to think about. Another key strategy they discuss are hinge questions. And they describe hinge questions are questions that you would maybe have at key points in your lesson, but to determine whether learners are actually grasping the main concept of your lesson. So that could maybe look like a multiple choice style question, whereby you're getting that very quick formative assessment snapshot of who is understanding this, who is grasping it, and who it maybe needs a little bit more support or scaffolding with this. So within the open-ended question section of the guidance document, they really emphasise the power of these two key questions. So asking your learners, what do you notice? So keeping it very open, posing something to your learners, whether it be a visual, whether it be a picture of something mathematical, whether it be a calculation or a series of calculations, and then just allowing them to observe, to think, and to be able to then share their thoughts and ideas in a really open space. You can see the example on the board of a practitioner that's actually used this within her classroom and the kind of things that learners have maybe come out with and reflected on. And then the follow-up question to that is, what do you wonder? So there's maybe something that they're actually thinking about that they want to extend their thinking on, or something that's maybe puzzling them in relation to whatever it is you've shared. So these are two really key golden nugget questions that we would strongly recommend and encourage using within your practice. So also within the open-ended questioning section of this guide, they like to look at the question, what is the same and what is different? So in this example that you can see on the screen, the practitioner has provided learners with 4 different shapes. And then they first ask the question, what do you notice is the same about these shapes? And learners have had the chance to observe, to reflect, to think about those similarities. And then you follow that up with what is different. So then they're having to look really closely and think carefully about what key things they notice in relation to differences. But again, this can be a really nice questioning strategy that you could try within your practice. So that brings us on to our first follow-up task for today. So in your staff teams, we would like you to spend the next 10 minutes approximately exploring the Education Scotland questioning document. The QR code is on the screen that will hopefully take you directly to the PDF. And as you're exploring this document, we would like you just to consider what questioning strategies do you already have embedded within your teaching practice? And are there maybe a few strategies that you would like to pick up and try in the coming weeks? Thank you very much. You can pause the video now and have a really good look through the guidance document. So that brings us on to the next section of our training today, which is around digital approaches to support assessment. And I would like to hand you over to Kirsty Banks, who will present on this area.
So as discussed already at early level, we use observation most often to assess our children's progress, sensitively interacting, sitting with the child, playing alongside and noticing generally. So to complement your observations, you might sometimes take photos using your iPad, so you're able to capture those snapshots of learning. If you have a series of photos that show how the learning progressed, this can also be helpful to assess a child's learning as well. And there might be evidence of progression and a progression of photos in their learning journals as well, so we can use those. You can also video children, use that function on your iPad if a natural moment arises, because sometimes it can be a bit contrived. You could ask the child questions such as, teach me about what you did there, or help us learn about what you did there. And that might spark some learning conversations with the child. You can use voice notes on your photos as well. That can be helpful. And this could either be by adding a voice note on Keynote or Pages, or adding a voice note on a photo on Shobi, as many of you are using Shobi. And as well as assessing the child's understanding, this will at the same time allow the child to reflect back on their learning, which will in turn deepen the learning experience for the child. You can also use play plenaries, and you can record these as well to consolidate learning after a period of time. So that would involve talking about their learning. It can also be helpful and encourage the children to engage in learning conversations. Again, you could pose questions such as, what maths did you do today? And tell me about the problems you solved today. If you are using the SBC early level numeracy trackers, or if you're in P1, you might be using SEAL planners. These can be uploaded as a PDF to a shared folder on OneDrive, or you can use Shobi and you can set the assignment to hidden if you would prefer parents didn't see these. And here on both apps, you can add highlighted pen, you can add notes, and on Shobi you can actually add voice notes, and they can be added. All of this can be added in real time by any teacher or practitioner, because we've all got access to that at the same time, which then allows for more efficient and collaborative working. You can also use Excel or numbers to create your own trackers on your iPad or on your computer. You can add in conditional formatting so that cells change colour according to the number you enter, and you can then track and assess individual progress of a child, but also it collates the information on another sheet and you can assess the progress of the class as a whole, which can be really useful to inform future planning. There is, in terms of moderation, there is a new early level maths and numeracy progression coming soon, which shows on average what on track might be for an ELK 3, ELK 4 or P1 child, and it uses coloured boxes. So this allows for effective moderation across the authority, and that coupled with early level moderation training sessions really supports that process.
Looking now at first and second level, similarly to early level, photos and videos can also be used to assess children's understanding, be that a photo of a worked calculation or a video showing how concrete materials have been used to solve a problem. You may also wish to consider using voice notes on photos as a helpful tool. This could either be by adding a voice note onto a Keynote or Pages document, or adding a voice note on top of a photo on Shobi as an annotation. As well as assessing the child's understanding, adding voice notes will at the same time allow the child to reflect back on their learning, which will in turn deepen the learning experience for that child. You can also make use of Shobi or OneDrive to upload any assessment documents, enabling more efficient working and collaboration, as it allows you to enable access to a huge number of other professionals as well as your own SLT instantly. As mentioned on the early level slide, you can also create formal trackers too. You could do this using the Numbers app on your iPad, or Excel, which is available both on your laptop and iPad. Here you can track and monitor individual progress, as well as collating information from each individual tracker to track the progress of the class as a whole, and this in turn can inform your future planning. Now we're going to explore how iPads can support assessment through a range of engaging and easy to use quizzing tools. So whether you're looking for quick checks for understanding, formal assessments, or a fun and interactive way to engage learners, the iPad has loads of options to meet our needs. Today we're going to focus on 3 key tools. Those are Microsoft Forms, Kahoot, and SumDog Diagnostics. So first, let's start with Microsoft Forms. This is a really versatile tool built right into the Microsoft 365 suite, and it's excellent for creating quick quizzes, surveys, or exit tickets. With Forms, you can design questions that are multiple choice, short answer, or even rating scales, which makes it really flexible for a variety of assessments. It also provides instant feedback, and the results are automatically saved, making it easy to track progress and identify areas for improvement. Forms integrates well with other apps like Teams, so it allows for easy sharing with students and even collaboration with colleagues when designing assessments. Next up is Kahoot, a platform that many of you might already be familiar with. Kahoot adds an element of gamification to assessments, turning quizzes into fun and competitive experiences for students. The iPad's portability enhances this tool, as students can join quizzes quickly with a shared game code no matter where they are in the classroom. Kahoot is particularly useful for formative assessments, as it gives us immediate insight into students' understanding, while the engaging, fast-paced format keeps students motivated. And finally, having a look at SumDog, particularly the SumDog Diagnostic tool. It's a really popular app that aligns with the Scottish curriculum and allows us to track students' progress in numeracy through fun, adaptive games. Now, although schools have to pay for their own licenses for full access, the free diagnostic tool provides a more in-depth analysis, identifying where each student's strengths and areas for development are. And this is especially useful for tailoring instruction and supporting individual learning journeys. The iPad offers a powerful range of tools that can transform how we assess learning in the classroom. So whether you're creating surveys with Microsoft Forms, making learning fun with Kahoot, or getting in-depth analysis through the SumDog Diagnostic Assessment, each of these tools can help us provide timely and meaningful feedback to our learners. Next, we're going to focus on Socrative, another fantastic tool available on the iPad for creating effective assessments. The platform allows teachers to design their own quizzes, whether it's for formative assessment, exit tickets, or even longer texts. And what makes Socrative especially useful is its ability to provide real-time results, so you can instantly gauge pupil understanding and adjust your teaching accordingly. Staff can create a range of question types, including multiple choice, true or false, and short answer questions, offering a lot of flexibility depending on what you're assessing. With immediate feedback available to pupils, Socrative really helps enforce learning, as students can reflect on their performance right away. Now, one of the key features I want to highlight today is the integration between Socrative and Shobi. For those of you who are already using Shobi, this partnership allows you to share your Socrative quizzes directly within the Shobi app, making it incredibly easy to distribute and manage assessments. So Socrative provides an intuitive and flexible way to assess pupil understanding, and its integration with Shobi makes the process of sharing and managing assessments even more efficient. Whether you're using it for quick formative checks or more structured assessments, Socrative is a really valuable tool in our digital toolkit. And to finish this digital section, I want to introduce you to an exciting new tool currently being trialled by Inspire Learning within the Earlston cluster, and it's called Magma Maths. Now, if this trial is successful, we may see that app rolled out authority-wide, providing both pupils and teachers with new opportunities to engage with maths in a dynamic way. Magma Maths is designed to support pupils in their numeracy development through an interactive and engaging experience. The app provides a range of problems that build on fundamental maths concepts, making learning both fun and accessible, and one where pupils are really encouraged to show their work in, not just the right answer. For pupils, Magma Maths turns traditional learning into an interactive experience where they can solve problems, receive immediate feedback, and track their progress over time. The app is also designed to encourage independent learning, empowering pupils to take ownership of their own maths development. From a teacher's perspective, Magma Maths provides a real-time data on pupil progress, making it easier to identify where students may need additional support. Teachers can view detailed insights into each pupil's strengths and areas for improvement, allowing for targeted and effective interventions. Inspire Learning's trial of Magma Maths in the Edelstein cluster is a great opportunity to see how digital tools can enhance both pupil learning and teacher efficiency. Should the trial be successful, it could well be rolled out across the authority and benefit schools more widely. So keep an eye on developments, and if you're in the Edelstein cluster, I encourage you to explore how Magma Maths can support your pupils' numeracy journey right now. And as always, reach out if you have any questions or feedback on the trial.
So that brings us on to our next reflective question of today. So in your school teams, we would like you to consider and reflect on what key digital approaches do you currently use to enhance and support assessment. So if you could pause the video now and discuss for the next 5-10 minutes in your staff teams. So we're now moving on to provide a brief introduction and to signpost some key resources and guidance around numeracy difficulties and dyscalculia. So this is obviously an area of significant complexity, but as you are using all your continuous formative assessment strategies that we've outlined in this training and your diagnostic approaches, you're going to get to know your learners really well in relation to their strengths and in relation to maybe their areas of development or areas of challenge. And when you're thinking about this, keep going back to these 4 kind of overarching big ideas of where is their conceptual understanding in relation to their concrete approaches, their pictorial approaches around different concepts. How does that feed into their procedural fluency? Their ability to follow the steps, to have different strategies. Do they have flexibility, efficiency, accuracy with these? What's their language like? What's their vocabulary like? Are they able to reason, to justify, and to defend their solutions? And how does all of that feed into their ability to problem solve? So using the progression pathway is going to provide that clarity and guidance across the phases and give you that support around the kind of key learning nuggets that build across each phase. If with all of that you're noticing that there maybe is quite significant gaps in their conceptual understanding, or you feel with frequent deliberate practice you're just not seeing that retention and that transfer to long-term memory, then there is potentially further investigation needed. So we're now going to consider just a few maybe assessment approaches that you might want to use or consider to have a deeper dive into maybe unpicking what is going on. So if you are identifying significant challenges, maybe within a learner's ability to subitize, to count forwards and backwards, to add 2 groups of concrete materials together, there's maybe challenges there around their number sense. So what can be a really useful strategy is using the SEAL planners, and these could be used as an assessment tool, but they could then also be used as an intervention tool. There are 5 different planners. These are all available on the Maths Padlet, and if anyone would like any further support or information around these, don't hesitate to reach out and get in touch with myself. But these go into a significant level of detail and depth across different domains to allow you to maybe look at where those specific gaps in learning are and where that breakdown in understanding occurs. Also available on the Numeracy and Maths Padlet are the Highland Diagnostic Assessments. So these are a series of assessments that you would need to, similarly to SEAL, carry out one-to-one, and they can allow you to dive deeper to identify those gaps and break down in number sense and number knowledge. So they're actually broken up into 2 types of assessments. So there's knowledge assessments and then there's strategy assessments. And again, they are available on the Padlet for you to have a wee investigate and a wee look at if you think that might be useful for particular learners within your class. So through using your deeper dive assessments, whether that be either the SEAL assessments or whether that be using the Highland Diagnostic assessments, you might have hopefully identified some kind of key gaps, maybe in their number knowledge or number understanding that you want to go back and look at. So at that point, really emphasising the concrete approaches and using the pictorial approaches are really going to support learners to build those models and to develop their understanding of number. However, if through using these approaches day in, day out, and doing lots of retrieval practice, lots of revising and going back over that prior learning and prior knowledge, if you are still finding that you're struggling to get that transfer from learners' working memory to learners' long-term memory, then it's definitely worth considering the different aspects of dyscalculia. So this is a very brief introduction and snapshot today. Later in the academic session, we're going to produce a much deeper dive into dyscalculia. So if that's something that you're interested in or you want to learn more about, please look out for that within your staff teams. But on the screen in front of you, you can see some of the key things that would define if a learner had dyscalculia. So just to kind of go through some of those subitizing skills. So we're going to talk a lot more about that in our next session on CPA, so definitely look out for that, but that's that ability to recognise and know what a number is without counting. If you notice that there's challenges around their short-term and their working memory, and again that ability to retrieve facts, that ability to bring that transfer from long-term memory, something to look out for and be mindful of. So also if you're identifying that the learner has ongoing challenges with everyday tasks that involve number, whether that be money, time, measure, that's something just to look out for and consider. Within that, is the learner able to estimate an answer, either to a calculation or a measurement? And if they find this very challenging, and if the estimates that they come out with are highly unrealistic, that's something also just to consider and think about in relation to dyscalculia. Another key area is that of ordering, sequencing, and knowing about directionality. So learners that maybe identify with dyscalculia will really struggle with the ordering and sequencing of numbers and being able to understand that in terms of greater or less than and what that means. Also, it's really important just to think about, you might see that learners really struggle to understand the number symbols, whether that be the addition sign or the equal sign, and that despite lots of repetition, lots of practice, lots of going over that they are still struggling to deal with the number symbols and to work effectively and accurately with these. Another key thing is the learner's ability to recall number facts. So whether that be addition bonds, whether that be times tables, knowledge and understanding, or whether that actually be those procedural facts that they require to carry out a particular operation or calculation, but you might find that they are repeatedly presenting with that despite lots of deliberate practice. And then the ability to apply those number skills to solve problems in different contexts, they will find that very challenging. So that's again just another kind of key thing. And also kind of knowing how numbers and amounts relate to each other. So knowing the numeral in words, the numeral in writing, what that might look like in terms of a concrete representation, and making those links might be particularly challenging. So just some of the key kind of overarching things to look out for when considering dyscalculia, but there's a lot more detail around this on the National Padlet for you to explore. The numeracy profiles are all available on the Numeracy and Mathematics Padlet. So there are 3 different profiles available. There is a teacher checklist, which is described as 4A. There is then a learner checklist that's described as 4B. And then there is a parent and carer checklist, which is described as 4C. So these are all available for download via the Padlet. This brings us on to the next follow-up activity. We would like you in your staff teams to now spend the next 10 to 15 minutes exploring the Dyscalculia tab on the SBC Way Numeracy and Maths Padlet, and maybe as part of that, familiarise yourselves with the numeracy profiles and the 3 different versions that exist. Or feel free to go on and have a look at the national Padlets that have been released around dyscalculia. Within these, there's a lot of training, there is some professional learning videos, and it's nice maybe just to familiarise yourself with what is actually available on those Padlets. So feel free to pause the video now and work away in your staff teams. So before we finish today, we just want to take the time to reflect and consider our 3 key aims of our session today that we shared at the start. So hopefully through all our content and all our different examples today, you feel you've developed a deeper understanding around effective assessment approaches in numeracy and mathematics, both in relation to that ongoing continuous formative assessment and ways to embed that within your practice, but also in relation to those diagnostic assessments and that more summative nature of assessment at key points in time. Hopefully also you feel you've built a stronger understanding around different questioning strategies that you can use to promote that mathematical thinking and mathematical reasoning. And again, keep referring to that Education Scotland document for help, support and guidance. And thirdly, we hope you now just feel you've got a better understanding of where to be able to access those guidance and support materials around numeracy difficulties, including that of dyscalculia. Thank you. Here are just a few key texts and documents that we have made reference to throughout our training session today if you want to go ahead and do any further reading. That brings us to the end of our professional learning session today on effective assessment approaches. And I just want to say a huge thank you for giving up your time, your effort and your energy that you've put into today. Hopefully you've had lots of rich professional discussion in your staff teams. Just before you go, we would hugely value if you could scan the QR code and just provide us with a little bit of feedback. We would love to hear what do you feel worked well today and what could make our training and our sessions even better. A huge thank you for your feedback and a huge thank you for your time.